The schools should not be tolerating
but
it.
the schools are not.
A teacher should not be saying, if you believe that women have vaginas and men have penises, you have to leave the school. That is complete.
I'm speaking.
No,
I'm speaking.
I'll
You spoke.
reply.
This is, I mean,
I'll reply.
Hello. I haven't
Let
finished.
Ava speak, please.
Now,
Douglas.
back on the trans issue, when you're talking about LGBT...
Very quickly, I don't know, Ava, anything about your career. I don't know if you have one. But you did try to imply that you knew something about mine, and you just showed you know nothing about it, because actually
It started like any other debate on Piers Morgan's show. 4 people with 4 strong opinions on one hot topic.
Gone to the
Ava,
I will.
If I may
And then,
say so
now
very
we're talking
quickly.
about LGBTQ.
If I may say so
and you're
very
creating...
quickly,
Hang
Pierre.
on.
On one side sat Ava Santina and a supportive doctor, defending gender identity lessons in schools. On the other, Douglas Murray and Piers Morgan, sharpening their arguments like blades. At first, the interview was calm and coordinated, but as soon as facts and feelings clashed, the gloves came off. And here's how it all went down before one panelist lost her breath on air.
In this particular case, the Telegraph cited this handful of examples. They were by teachers, individual teachers. They were not school policy. And in at least one case, the school disowned the teacher and the policy and said that it wouldn't happen again.
But what about this case in Rye College?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there are some examples.
The doctor opened with a familiar defense, to not panic over one bad apple. A single teacher caught on tape doesn't mean the entire school system is poisoned. That's not school policy, he argued, pointing out that in some cases schools even disowned such rogue teachers.
On the basis of those exceptions, you can't make a generalized attack upon the school system and suggest that all our kids are being propagandized in this way, because it's simply not.
The doctor backed up, adding that kids deserve respect for their identities, not public fear-mongering. To him, parents worried about gender ideology were blowing up exceptions into epidemics. His point was simple: stop generalizing. Just because one teacher goes off script doesn't mean classrooms everywhere are brainwashing kids. In his eyes, critics were inventing a crisis out of scraps.
I think, to bring Douglas back in, when you hear that teacher, there's clear evidence of what we've all been fearing has been going on, which is a teacher caught on tape literally spewing nonsensical gender ideology propaganda.
But one teacher.
Yes,
only
I think, by
one
the way,
teacher.
one
out of
teacher-
tens of thousands.
Well, hang on.
But here's the thing. When does just one teacher stop being dismissed as a blip and start becoming evidence of a bigger issue? If each case is shrugged off as just an exception, how many exceptions add up to a pattern? Then Piers Morgan did what he does best. He rolled the tape. Because once, the infamous clip of a teacher lecturing students about gender identities was brought up, suddenly the debate was no longer hypothetical. Piers seized on it like a smoking gun.
Caught on
I
tape,
think-
right? There have been many other instances of this being reported, but no one's actually had it on tape. It's a bit like, I would liken it to the Partygate scandal, when we finally got a video of the people having what was clearly a party. There have been lots of rumours about it.
So-
now we have a teacher clearly on tape doing this
But
stuff.
it's not official school
So,
policy.
if I may,
Schools across the
if I may.
country are
Well,
not.
she's still, to
I'm
my
not
knowledge,
sanctioning this.
she is still working with us.
The doctor tried to shrink the moment. To him, it was still just one teacher, hardly grounds to indict the entire education system. His stance was clear. Evidence of a single mishap doesn't justify a culture war. But neither Piers Morgan or Douglas Murray was ready to let go.
Ava rather unfortunately misspoke earlier when she said that the schoolgirl in question was acting out of fallacy. I think you meant a fantasy. But actually she is acting out of
Thanks, Douglas.
fallacy.
Thanks ever
a
so much.
fallacy.
But do you know what I find
fallacy
fascinating? You're right with
which has
fallacy.
been-
Do you know what's
a
fascinating
fallacy
about
which
Douglas?
has been propagated, a fallacy which has been propagated by gender ideologues and is doing profound damage to gay people, among others, in our society, as well as women.
Like
and let
you've
me
ever
explain
cared.
very quick. Let me
Ever cared.
explain very quickly why. I can't quite hear you, but I can hear you muttering something. Let me quickly explain why. A poll that just got published in the United States showed that among the general population, support for gay marriage has been starting to decline in the last year. Why is
There are several instances where rumors were dismissed, until one piece of footage confirmed what everyone suspected. The point was clear. If it happened once, it can happen again, and parents have every right to worry.
Because the arguments that actually brought about liberal rights for all minorities in the last few decades have started to get turned on their head and turned against people. What is the source of that? It is the gender ideology movement. What is the tripwire for the general public? It is children. It is people learning that their children are being taught nonsensical.
Notice how the mood is beginning to shift gradually. What started as a theoretical argument about fairness is turning into a clash over hard evidence. Murray didn't even need to interject yet, but he just had to. The contrast was already striking. Ava and the doctor waving away concerns as isolated. And here's the bigger question. If a short video can tilt the entire debate, what does that say about how fragile public trust really is?
It is being seen by the wider public, most of whom are heterosexual and don't need to identify as cis or anything else. It is being seen from that vantage point as the LGBTQIA+ movement losing control.
Murray didn't shout. He didn't need to. He called the teaching of radical gender ideas in schools deeply harmful, not just for children, but for society's balance. Instead of stories or emotion, he went straight to numbers. Murray cited polling data showing a majority of people now pulling back
from supporting LGBTQ causes.
And so a backlash is starting. And the backlash is coming because people are lying to children and are using children for medical experiments. There's nothing funny about that. There's nothing that should cause levity in that. It should be treated by adults seriously.
Okay.
His argument was that pushing extreme gender theory in classrooms was backfiring. The very movement that once fought for gay rights risked undoing its own progress. By demanding schools adopt ideas many parents weren't comfortable with, activists were turning natural allies into opponents. Murray framed it not as a cultural quirk, but as a serious consequence with real-world damage. The contrast was sharp. Ava and the doctor leaned on empathy and respect for identity. Murray leaned on cold logic, charts, and public mood. He wasn't painting teachers as villains. Rather, he was warning that the strategy itself was collapsing support. But before we get to Ava's counterattack and the career line KO, let's see what happened when Murray had a confrontation with another woke activist.
I'm a female party leader. So it's easy for me to say that that's doable, that's possible. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of young women who look like me do not have the same privileges and are still fighting so many battles that maybe I've overcome because of, Lord knows why, could be just my dominant.
When Douglas Murray squared off with Sylvana Simons, you could tell from the start this wasn't going to be a friendly coffee chat. Sylvana leaned hard on personal experience.
But it's not to say that they have the same opportunities and the same privileges, so they still have a long way to go. And I know from experience that it's important for them to have role models and people that speak out on their behalf.
That kind of point lands emotionally. Everyone nods because it feels true. But Murray wasn't playing the feelings game. He came armed with examples that couldn't be shrugged off.
Pass it back to Douglas then. Do you feel you can always speak as freely as you want to?
Myself, yes. I think that I'm in a, as it were, a very privileged position. I know this from audiences and readers who are in touch with me, that increasingly the things I describe which have caused career destruction for very eminent people. I mean, thinking of things like the Nobel Prize-winning scientist Tim Hunt, who made this one joke at a conference in Korea, and by the time he'd landed in London, he'd lost every job he had. I'm saying this has happened to very prominent people.
He dropped the Tim Hunt case, 1830 to 1957, like a brick on the table. Here's a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, career obliterated over a single bad joke. Murray's message was simple. If even the most accomplished people can be destroyed this easily, what chance does the average worker have? Suddenly, Sylvana's "we need more role models" pitch started to look paper thin.
something that's not that popular anymore, or said something off colour, and so on and so forth. But my point is that all of that stuff trickles down to the workplace. And what I'm struck by now is the extent to which people who are not self-employed journalists and writers feel that they can't say the things that some people in public can say.
Then came the Sam Smith topic.
I did this on the BBC the other week, that this issue came up with this pop singer Sam Smith, who described himself as non-binary. And I got into a certain amount of trouble that didn't bother me, but because I said I don't think there's any such thing, or at least no one's explained what it is sufficiently for me to agree to it. Now, I know from feedback, including feedback in the studio from certain people at the BBC, that this is not an unpopular thing to say. I would think that if you went out to the general public and said, do you think there are people who are non-binary, and if so, can you say what they are? You'd get a fragment of 1% of people able to say that. And so my point on that is not that I've closed the argument on that, but we haven't had the argument on a whole set of things, and it seems only to be a few people who do have a voice in public who can have it.
Silvana, you're nodding your head, not in agreement.
Because I'm always surprised that certain people feel that they need to give their okay for other people to be or think something they don't necessarily understand. It doesn't matter whether I understand the beauty of physical love between two men. There's no point. You don't need my permission to feel and act. So why does Sam Smith or anybody else who considers himself non-binary needs permission from whoever?
That sounds like common sense on the surface. Who's going to argue with that? But Murray flipped it. Respect isn't the same as twisting language into knots just because someone demands it. And he had a killer point.
I think it's slightly more complex than that, if I can say so. Let me give one reason why. Actually, the Sam Smith thing was significant. Again, sorry to go on about the BBC. The BBC's reporting of that immediately did what he asked, which was that they changed the pronouns. And some people think this isn't a big thing. Some of us do get a bit stuck on this.
I'm only interrupt you just so everybody is up to speed with the sense of, instead of he, she, him, her, non-binary people often want to use they, them. So it would be...
So my point was simply that if you haven't actually had this out in public, you haven't actually discussed much of it, it's a bit strange that a major news organisation would slip into saying exactly what a person had asked themselves to be described as simply because they had asked for it.
Sounds like respect to me.
It's not
nothing more, nothing less.
It's not the same thing as respect, because it's something which we haven't had out. He himself said, I don't know what it means to be non-binary. So my suggestion was he should go away and think about it. And in the meantime, we shouldn't all mutilate the language to fit around.
Murray's knockout punch came when he cut straight to biology.
Yes, it is. I'm sure you're all people who've seen sheepdogs in operation. But if you see a sheepdog trying to get a herd of sheep, it doesn't need to go and force them into a corner. It goes and not even nips, but pretends to nip around the edges, and that way you can make everyone move like this. There is a real and significant risk in our society with the free press at the moment that people coming and making very slight nips around the edges make the whole herd move in another direction, and that is exactly what's happened with this.
What are you worried about will be the end result?
I'm worried that we tell little lies, and we get used to little lies, and then we tell bigger ones. I think it's a lie to pretend that biology doesn't matter. I think it's unwise to pass those things through always simply because of...
That line wiped out pages of theory. And by the time he explained that societies can either silence speech or allow more of it, the debate was already lopsided. But even with the look of concession on her face, Silvana was still appealing to courtesy. But Murray had moved the conversation to reality.
And there's a big difference between courtesy and respect. Respect is what we absolutely need in order to live together on this planet as a diverse society, something that is hard to accept for certain people, but we are a diverse society. What we see happening is new perspectives coming in. New people saying we want to have our seat at the table because we can either represent ourselves or, as myself, have been given the mandate to represent certain groups of people. Now, those same people who for decades, if not hundreds of years, have been the dominant factor in deciding what is on the table, are afraid. I do understand. I don't understand what they're afraid of. I think I do, but I'd like to hear from them.
She spoke with passion, but Murray spoke with clarity. And when clarity meets passion in a debate, clarity usually walks away with the win. But we can say the same about Ava Santina.
Douglas, it's really important, actually, all of that point that you've just brought up, it's very on brand for you because, you know, you like to stoke fear. You've actually made a career out of it. I'll take you back to your book, The Strange Death of Europe, and you made a big fright, you frightened the entire public about your thoughts on Europe, and we ended up in Brexit. You weren't the sole contributor to that, but you were a big voice.
Can we stick on to the
Ava, I will. And then, now we're talking about LGBTQ,
if I may say so
and you're
very
creating...
quickly,
Hang on, you spoke, I'm speaking.
No,
I'm speaking,
I'll
you spoke.
reply.
This is,
I'll reply.
Hello. I haven't
let
finished.
Ava speak, please.
Now,
Douglas.
back on the trans issue, when you're talking about LGBTQ, what you've just done there is basically say that the whole of America, who have historically had a problem with gay marriage, are now turning on it because a couple of children in a classroom in Sussex want to be a cat. If you can't see the ridiculousness in that argument, I can't help you.
The bigger...
Ava shot back at Murray with sharp words, accusing him of fueling fear. She even dragged in his own book, claiming his writing had been designed to whip up panic about culture wars. To her, this wasn't reasoned logic. It was old-fashioned fear-mongering. Instead of defending his book point by point, he turned her move against her. With a dry, cutting tone, he delivered the line that made headlines.
Very quickly, I don't know, Ava, anything about your career. I don't know if you have one. But you did try to imply that you knew something about mine, and you just showed you know nothing about it, because actually my 2017 bestseller, The Strange Death of Europe, was not about the EU. So you should learn at some point to read more.
That must have landed like a gut punch, not because it dismantled her argument, but because it undercut her standing in the debate altogether. The point was clear. If you're
Going to accuse me of spreading fear, you'd better have the professional weight to back it up. Instead of resetting the conversation, Ava's attack had opened the door for a brutal counterstrike. It wasn't just about the book anymore. It was about status, authority, and experience. If your strongest shot in a debate is to go after someone's resume, did you really win the point, or just lose the floor?
About
before
Europe.
commenting upon
it was about, and it was about
so
migration.
Let me very quickly.
And how rude are you? How rude are you?
Very quickly. Very
You've
quickly.
built a career out of fear-mongering, and you're now importing those evangelical American ideas onto UK television.
You haven't even
it's
built
very
a career, have you? You haven't even built a career.
What are you talking about? I'm on the same panel as you, hon, and we're getting this.
The debate then slid into the sharpest corner, sex and gender. The doctor backed her, trying to add nuance about how schools need to make room for children who identify differently.
Well,
first of all, I must
there is no
respond
such
to
thing
Ava,
as gender
Piers.
ideology. We
I
all
must
have
respond
gender
to
identities. You identify as a man, and I fully...
But Piers wasn't going to let that slide. He stressed biology as the anchor point, going straight for a reductionist example.
No, hang on. I don't identify as a man. I was born a biological
Yes,
male.
yes.
That's where this whole thing
Piers, you need to let me
goes
come in.
rogue. I'll bring you back in, Douglas, in one second. That's where the whole debate goes rogue. You were born a biological male. You were born a biological female. Douglas, biological male. This is just a fact, right?
No.
Once you start saying there are hundreds of genders and you can identify as anything you want, you're going to end up with kids at school going, I'm a horse. And you've got to treat me like a...
The point wasn't zoology. It was to show how quickly the logic can stretch into the absurd if there's no clear boundary. This created a clash of frames, because Ava and the doctor treated gender as a lived reality. Murray and Piers treated it as a slippery slope that risks confusing children who are still figuring themselves out. And here's the question. When does identity talk stop being personal and start becoming confusing for children watching adults argue over reality? It was less about winning facts, more about drawing a line between respect and reason. And neither side was about to surrender their line in the sand.
Using two things,
No, I'm not.
sex and gender.
I'm not.
I
because
accept
they are being conflated.
biological sex is one thing which I totally accept, and so do 99% of the people in the LGBT plus community. Gender is something different. Gender identity is how you see yourself.
And do you believe it's limitless?
No, I don't believe it's limited.
What's the limit?
Well, there was basically male and female and intersex, but there are people who have different gender identities.
No, but how many genders are there?
Well, There is no fixed number.
So what's the limit?
I don't see a particular limit.
There's no limit. So when you said there's no, you said there is a limit. You admit there's no limit.
Sorry.
Well,
there is.
Then came the point where the debate seemed to tip. Ava, who had been fiery all along, started to sound defensive. Murray's calmness and Piers's quick sound bites gave their side rhythm, while Ava's responses came out rushed. The doctor tried to hold the line with her, but the momentum had already shifted. Murray stayed steady, looking unfazed, while Piers delivered his arguments in tight phrases made for clips. Ava, by contrast, was now explaining more than striking. In TV debates, explaining too much can look like scrambling. The visuals told the whole story. Two composed men pressing their case, one defensive Ava, and a doctor who could no longer carry the pro-identity side without slipping into jargon. It wasn't that Ava had no points. It was that Murray and Piers had the cleaner, sharper ones that played well on screen. How often does a single line or even a raised eyebrow decide who won a live debate? In this case, the clip made it clear. The edge belonged to the skeptics.
Is there a limit or not to the number of genders?
Identity.
No, that's sex. But gender, is there a limit to number of genders?
Well, there are some people who are asexual. That's an identity.
No, there are
some
the BBC.
people,
The BBC has put in education videos. There are 100+ genders.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
So what is the limit? What's the number?
Well, I'm not going to specify a particular number, but it's very small.
But where do you draw the line?
Well, I draw the line based on science and evidence. And we know that there is a thing called intersex, where people are born with a mixture of both.
That is literally what.
So what do we actually learn from this clash? First, passion can rally a cause. Ava and the doctor showed real conviction. But in front of a live audience, conviction isn't enough. When Murray brought out poll numbers and calmly tied them to real-world consequences, the mood shifted. When Piers dropped the horse and cat example, it cut through to viewers who don't have patience for jargon. One sharp personal jab from Murray about Ava's career suddenly overshadowed all the nuance she had been trying to build. It was brutal, but it worked.
What it says on the tin, that is intersex.
Yeah.
People are born with chromosomes from both, right? That is a medical condition.
Yeah.
That's inarguable, right? We're talking about gender.
Well, trans identity is also a biological fact.
I know, but once I've
rooted in brain structures and processes.
I understand it, but once
as the new science shows.
But once you get into 100 genders, people can
we're
literally...
not debating 100 genders.
Well, actually, the BBC has taught kids, this is back to Douglas's point about affecting the brains of impressionable young kids.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the BBC if they're saying 100+.
Televised debates aren't like seminars. They reward speed, clarity, and sound bites. Douglas and Piers knew that, and they played the game like veterans. Ava and the doctor leaned on nuance and identity language, which can feel thoughtful in writing, but risks looking fragile on TV. It's not just about who is right, but who can package their point the cleanest in 30 seconds or less. So, if public debates favor short, sharp lines, what happens to careful nuance when ideology meets the camera? Douglas Murray and Piers Morgan walked away as the stronger team. Their mix of calm logic and sharp jabs landed better than Ava's passionate but defensive replies. Ava fought hard. The doctor backed her, but the live exchange tilted against them. If one live moment can shape public opinion, then the real question is, who wins the next battle when ideology is on trial?